Inclusion.
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 Inclusion. Inclusion.
Inclusion podcast by the Centre for Inclusive Leadership.
Hello everyone, welcome to today's Inclusion podcast. I'm Jagz Doheley, your host for today. I'm joined by three fantastic individuals and two phenomenal partnerships that we have with at the Centre for Inclusive Leadership. I am going to take you over to Paul, who you may have met in the first podcast. If you'd like to reintroduce yourself and then pass us around. Thank you.
Thanks, Jagz. Hi, I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh. I'm the Chief Executive Officer, or as we said last time,
The Chief Emotional Officer.
very good.
It's like a test.
It's great to be back. No, really pleased. I'm really thrilled to have both Trevor and Simon in the studio with us today because we're going to have a conversation about a new venture that we have called the Inclusionomics Company. So we're going to get into that. But let's just meet everybody in the room. So Simon, welcome. Good to have you with us.
You too, Paul. Yeah, I'm Simon Stapleton. I'm Chief Executive of Truthsayers. We've developed a technology platform which measures what people really feel as opposed to what they just might tell you.
Yeah, so that's so important, right? Because when we get into the conversation about inclusionomics, we said last time when we were talking about the last podcast, we were talking about the idea of inclusion being a feeling. So we're going to really want to get into that. Tell us a little bit about your background. That'd be interesting for people to know a bit more about you.
So I started when I left university in technology. So I was mostly tech companies, Microsoft, Oracle. And then I went into consulting. And it's really at that point I saw how technology has an impact on people's lives.
Okay.
And so ever since then, I've always been really interested in that impact. And it was a great opportunity a few years ago when I met my business partner, Andy, when he had this tech platform he'd developed, which was measuring how consumers feel about products and fragrances and things like that. And so we took that on and developed it so it's being applied into the corporate space. And as you know, you and I have had many projects together where we've seen the fantastic impact of this technology.
Absolutely. Speaking of fragrances, Trevor.
Fragrances.
Great to have you with us.
Thanks
So
very
Trevor,
much,
tell us a
Paul.
little bit about yourself. Introduce yourself.
So I'm Trevor Meboroh-Collinson, and my name is shortened to TMC. I am effectively I'm the data lead at the Centre for Inclusive Leadership, and I'm helping clients have a more data-driven approach to their work inclusion. My background, well, I should say I look quite young, but I've been in the city.
Oh, you do? Let's say reassuring.
Why
He
not?
does.
Why not? I've been in the city about 36 years, various roles, mainly complex solution selling, which basically means talking to clients, being consultative and finding out the types of things they need. My area of speciality is data and analytics, and I've worked at some really interesting companies that have had hockey stick moments. Bloomberg was one, MSCI, which was part of Morgan Stanley, was another, and most recently, London Stock Exchange.
Fantastic.
What do you mean by a hockey stick moment?
A hockey stick moment, that's typically a company that has a fantastic product and experiences a huge growth spurt. So it's shaped like a hockey stick. And that's what we're expecting to do with the Inclusionomics Company.
It's really good though, isn't it? Because this idea of, Simon was talking about the idea of being able to measure feelings, which was the really conversation we were interested in having. And the idea of measuring feelings and your point about the data companies that you come from, where you're interested in measurements, this is kind of where we're heading with this conversation, right?
Well, as I said, you and I have worked on a number of projects where we're measuring how people really feel about how included they are. And so, in traditional methods, if you ask somebody how they feel, they'll tell you actually how they think they feel, as opposed to how they really, really feel. And as we know, people edit, we all do. We edit how we want to represent ourselves. And so what we do is actually measure what people really feel and understand what's going to help them be more inclusive or feel more inclusive or just, change their behaviours. And so with the Inclusionomics Company, we're going to absolutely put a rocket under that and in terms of data acquisition. And so we can start to project how organisations are going to benefit from a more inclusive environment.
Really good. Trevor, I'm going to ask you in a second to help us understand what Inclusionomics is, but I just want to come and follow Simon for a second, if I may, because that idea for me about you just talking about there is really, really interesting. And yes, absolutely. We've seen so many situations where the reality is this point you make about the difference between what I think and what I feel is important, isn't it?
Right.
Because for some people, I think many people really, the reality is there's a difference between what we feel and what we feel we can say. And so because of that, I often moderate my answers. So I might be an organization that's interested in people data, but the data I've got is being passed to me by people who are not feeling very psychologically safe. So that data is massively discounted, isn't it? We talk about this dissonance we see when we're doing our reporting. It's fascinating, isn't it? When you look at what people will talk about the implicit and explicit stuff in a minute. But let me pull back to Trevor. Trevor, tell us what's the Inclusionomics Company? Tell me a bit about that.
Well, actually, maybe before I talk about the Inclusionomics Company, I should say that.
Well, what's Inclusionomics?
What's Inclusionomics?
Thank you.
But actually, I want to go a step back beyond that.
Sure.
So I came to Paul and the Centre for Inclusive Leadership by virtue of being a client. And I worked at an organisation, well, I won't name them right now, but you probably heard it previously. And we were at a period where we were coming out the George Floyd, the terrible situation that was, and the Black Lives Matter movement. And we were looking within the organisation, how are we going to respond to that? So we created an ERG, and we had the great fortune in creating that ERG, Employee Resource Group, for those that don't know ERG. We met Paul, and Paul came in to speak to our senior leadership about, a reverse mentorship scenario. So I know from doing that ERG process and the SLT reverse mentoring, there are a lot of people that felt they weren't included. And when you're not feeling included, there's potentially in a financial services organisation for your performance to start to wander. You've got other things on your mind. So bring it right back to where Paul started. What's Inclusionomics? Inclusionomics is, I suppose you could see it as a new trend that's developing. It's where organisations and employees meet. The employer is interested in how he can or she can understand the engagement of the employee population. And by understanding that, provide a mechanism for improving inclusion and other related matters. On the employee side, if my employer, my boss, my organisation understands me better, understands the needs that I need and how I really feel about something, they're going to take steps to improve that. And by making those steps, you're going to see improvement in performance, collaboration, innovation, agility. There's a whole range of research talking about the benefits of inclusivity. So what Inclusionomics is the combining of those two things. How can we help an organisation elevate the lived work experience of the employee, but at the same time, help the organisation, help the senior leadership teams in avoiding that really corrosive exclusion, which has a big cost to it. So those are the two components of Inclusionomics, and that's what the Inclusionomics Company does. It works on Inclusionomics with clients.
I think one of the difference in what we're trying to do with the Inclusionomics Company is rather than this subject to be quite woolly and fluffy and touchy-feely, it needs to be that, but also it needs to be about the numbers and it needs to be about performance and actually how is shareholders' interest being represented in inclusion. Why is it important from a business perspective? Because at that point it becomes real in terms of investors. It becomes real in terms of the reason to do it, the motivation. It takes it from a kind of virtue signalling and blind policy to actually what really makes a difference inside an organisation. Yeah,
it's absolutely right. And it's funny. I was thinking as Trevor was talking, I was thinking about how we came to be connected in the first place. And it was intriguing. I was doing a piece of work for a C-suite, actually a company we obviously both know called Stanton House. And at the end of the presentation, we've been chatting around our Grace to Lead concept, which is a kind of big ticket conversation for C-suites to think about that whole issue of how do you actually own the fact that this whole inclusion conversation is tricky. And they said to me, somebody you need to meet. So they introduced me to Truthsayers, and I had the first conversation with one of Simon's business partners, Tim, and then we quickly got together, met in London. We just went, oh, this is like, why are we not going to do this, right? This is like so obvious. And obviously it's like the moment, it was honestly like that moment, a kind of good moment where, the Ray Kroc moment where, the guy with the hamburgers meets the guy with the milkshakes, and you went, oh my goodness, this is such an obvious point. How have I not understood this before? Because as you know, our whole thing is about inclusion, is about feeling. And what we're really interested in is actually understanding how people really feel. But we were doing that using quant data. So we were using it like everybody else does. We would do surveys and have conversations and do, virtual 360, verbal 360s and all the rest of it. But what we weren't able to do is we weren't able to cut through into the actual, but to your language, bypass the consciousness and get to what people really think. And now, of course, working with Truthsayers, we can do that, which gives us an incredible position in the marketplace.
Well, we know that's the difficult bit, don't we? So the people we speak to, that is where it gets really tricky, is how you actually measure inclusion, how you measure what people are really feeling, and how you do it consistently as well. And so with the Inclusionomics Company, it's really about that consistency point too, and being able to build a benchmark and index it so that we can look across whole industries or whole sectors and measure across that how people are really feeling about how inclusive their organisations are.
Sounds so powerful.
It really is, Jagz, because I think the thing is that what this conversation's lacked is it's lacked the data. So, and I think what it now gives us is the ability to measure inclusion, which is a really huge, it's revolutionary really. But I think the point about your benchmarking is crucial, because that's really where Trevor came in, because when Trevor and I started talking, we actually started talking for a different conversation, didn't we, when we first started our chat?
Black leader acceleration programs. And Paul said to me, "That's interesting, Trevor, and we could do something there, but I think I've got something that's more up your particular line, given that you're from a data and analytics background." But I think to Simon's point about benchmarking and peer analysis, what's clear, and this is a trend that's not new, it's happening right now, is ESG. Maybe a number of the listeners have heard about it: environmental, social, and governance. And ESG is about companies disclosing something about themselves. They can disclose ESG, they can look at climate, they can look at greenwashing. The next thing we believe is going to be very important, and it's definitely backed up by the way in institutional investors look at things, is how inclusive are you? Are you an organisation that really represents its employee base? So the Inclusionomics Company, beyond providing a means for allowing a client to collect their data efficiently, analyse their data and dissect it, one of the byproducts, one of the benefits we'll be able to now look, as you said, look at sectors, look at kind of like industries and say, how inclusive are they? And that will be a boon for institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. So I think that what we're doing at the Inclusionomics Company could quite easily become the ESG and I. So watch the space on that one.
Hockey stick.
Hockey stick.
Hockey stick.
Sounds amazing.
Hockey stick. It'd be really interesting though, I tell you what, because the people won't know what's so revolutionary about this testing, right? Because everyone go, yeah, we do employee engagement surveys, we do all of that. Yeah. And it's interesting to understand from a user's point of view, what they get and they experience. And I'm particularly interested in, Simon, if you could maybe tell us a little bit about how implicit response testing works. But I would love, because I think, Jagz, it's always about the podcast about the individual, right? I would love to talk a little bit about the conscious leadership piece that we did recently for the British Retail Consortium, because there was a really nice bit we did for the individual, and I had the privilege of actually playing that back. So, but could tell us a bit about how it works, because it's sort of gamified, isn't it? It's quite interesting.
So one of the downsides of traditional tools is when you give somebody a choice, they may edit how they choose to answer.
Sure.
And either because they want it to be that way or because they feel they should answer it in a certain way. It's not always how they really feel. Not to say it's not valid data, it's just not always aligns to their truth underneath. And so what we do is we take away the opportunity for choosing how to answer. We use a slightly different way of measuring the feelings, and that is just by response time. It's very much like a video game. All you have to do is press the button you're told. And the magic of the system is that if you don't agree with what's presented, actually you'll be slower to press the button than if you agree with it. And we measure that hesitation, and that's really underneath how it works. And so what we did with the BRC and the conscious leadership is we took a number of delegates through the summer school, and really to help them understand how they feel about certain aspects of leadership. And really, it's not to say you're good or bad at them. It's more to say, this is your innate way of dealing with the situation. you might struggle in these situations and you might excel in others. It's really the gap between what you think you should be and how you really feel is how much investment or effort you'll have to put into behaving that way. And that's really good for the people who take part, because in some ways it kind of helps them understand, I knew it was always like that, so it kind of helps them feel good or feel okay about the way they know they work inside. The other thing is it helps them understand what they need to do to change their behaviours, which is a much longer in a much longer time frame, because we don't always change how we behave overnight. But at least you can be conscious about it, and it's just that conscious awareness is then how you improve as a leader.
Really, really interesting. And there was some great data points in that particular example. So the idea though is we talk about this notion of and we have fun with this, right? We're in the kind of cognitive dissonance because the idea of the game essentially is that you see a statement and then you have an instruction, and the two are not related, but it's that, as you say, you measure the hesitation, which is very interesting.
Yeah, the gap between the two, which we call cognitive dissonance, is the difference between how I choose and how I voluntarily will respond to that. And the bigger the gap is, the more the difference or the challenge I face in that situation.
And it's funny, because I was thinking, and Jagz, if you imagine this then, so you think about when we talk about inclusion as a feeling, we say that when somebody feels, now these are all the dimensions that we've essentially been able to code: feel respected, feel psychologically safe, feel valued, feel trusted, have a sense of belonging, able to be their best selves and do their best work. That is the inclusion experience, right? And what we're able to do with this tool, which is so interesting, is measure the extent to which you really feel valued, you really feel respected.
It sounds unimaginable.
It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary.
It isn't even able to reach, but I'm so excited to hear that that's actually been created. We're in a space where I know we're about to wrap up as well now, but I would love to hear what the next steps are and what you're excited about for what your journey can come to.
Well, it's worth saying, I think this is a kind of Trevor call really, but from my side, I think what we essentially have here is you've got the Chief Executive of Truthsayers, you've got the Chief Executive of the Centre for Inclusive Leadership, and we've got this new company that we've formed called the Inclusionomics Company, which our dear friend here is leading on for us. And I think the question for us is, over time, what can that journey look like for us as we marry the idea of the data and the solution? We're interested in that. And Trevor's talked about benchmarking, and there's some kind of big aspirational ideas about that. But I think one of the things that we are also interested in, Trevor, right, isn't it, is about how we scale that and what that means for us, because we're going to be looking to start working with partners pretty soon and expand out. You've got a whole business plan that's about to roll out. It may be good to give us a little sneak preview about some of the things you've got in your mind.
Sure, a little sneak preview. I think the great thing is that there are a lot of companies out there that need help. Some know that they have a problem. Some are unaware of the problem, and we can help both. It's not just a national thing. This is European. It's global. So you could go to the 3 regions and find companies that will be looking at this. And I guess what they're wanting a product, a service, an offering that's going to help them materially, both with the employee base, which you've heard. The employees can kind of have a sense of how they've always felt this, and now they're seeing it presented kind of quite cleanly and clinically. But the employer has the problem kind of dissected with surgical precision, such that they can say, that's where the problem exists, that's how people feel. Now, what do we do about it? What's the remedial action that we'll take? And there's a range of services that can happen. But ultimately, once they've gone through those remedial works, you're wanting to head that organisation down the path of being a more inclusively led organisation with all the benefits that happen there, as well as at the same time reducing the potential financial impact on them of the cost of exclusion, which a lot of them don't realise that underneath the iceberg element. So scaling is going to be a key focus for the organisation. We've got a pilot going, but once we've successfully concluded that, we'll be looking to get maybe some of the listeners and viewers, if you're interested in this particular area of the business, we could talk, because we need people that are suitably qualified to help promote this service, which I think is going to be groundbreaking.
That's fantastic. I think we're at the stage where there's so much analytics that goes behind inclusionomics, and there's so much neuroscience that goes behind Truthsayers' work. It's such a intricate piece that a lot of people don't understand, that you may see the duck on top of the water, but the feet are going. And I'm so excited, because in the next couple of episodes, or over the next series, you may see both Trevor and Simon pop up again as we do a session specifically, a podcast specifically for them. But I would like to take a moment once again to thank you all for listening to today's session. We've gone through some intricate topics. I would love to invite you to rewind, listen, and pick on things that may interest you. Do some research, reach out to us if you need anything at all. And we look forward to highlighting our next topic on our social media. So keep an eye out.